And I said, all right, I'm a radical guy. I'm going to sell everything I own. I'm out of nightclubs and I'm going to go become a humanitarian volunteer. And then I applied to the 10 famous organizations that I'd tangentially heard of, from the Doctors Without Borders to Red Crosses and Salvation Armies and World Visions. And maybe no surprise, nobody would take me. So I hit a dead end there as I was rejected by about 10 organizations. And very fortunately for me, and I'll kind of end chapter 2 here, one organization who was not on the first list of 10 said if I was willing to pay them $500 a month for the pleasure of volunteering, and if I was willing to go live in the poorest country in the world, post-war Liberia, West Africa, then I could join their mission. And I said, oh my gosh, this is opposite. What's more opposite than paying to volunteer and then actually going to the most extreme country on planet
Earth? Hello and welcome to Get Yourself Optimized. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer. It is my pleasure to have Scott Harrison with us. Scott spent almost 10 years as a nightclub promoter in New York City before leaving to volunteer on a hospital ship off the coast of Liberia, West Africa, as a volunteer photojournalist. Returning home to New York City 2 years later, he founded the nonprofit organization Charity Water in 2006, turning his full attention to the global water crisis and the world's then 1.1 billion people without clean water to drink. He created public installations and innovative online fundraising platforms to spread international awareness of the issue. In 16 years, with the help of more than 1 million donors worldwide, which I'm one of them, Charity Water has raised more than $750 million and funded over 137,000 water projects in 29 countries. When completed, those projects will provide 17.4 million people with clean, safe drinking water. Scott's been featured in Fortune magazine's list of 40 under 40, Forbes Impact 30, and Fast Company's 100 most creative people in business, where he earned the number 10 spot. He's the author of the New York Times bestselling book, Thirst. Scott, it's so great to have you on the show.
All right, this will be fun. Thanks for having me. It's always a little painful hearing your bio read, right?
Yeah. Well, you're kind of a big deal.
Not at all. Not at all.
Yeah, you've done amazing things, though. It's impressive, and a lot of people are grateful, I'm sure.
Well, I'm grateful for your support and friendship over the years.
Yeah, of course. So, how did you go on this crazy journey? I don't know, impetus, some outside force or inner realization contributed to you making this 90-degree turn and going completely, which probably your friends at the time looked at as off the rails. So,
yeah. Well, I saw that new Netflix movie this week with my wife. What is it? Leave the World Behind. And I was reminded how much I like chapters in movies. Wes Anderson used to do this, chapter 1, chapter 2. So I think my life is in 3 chapters. The first, I was born in Philadelphia, middle-class family. My dad was a businessman. My mom was a writer for the Philadelphia Inquirer and a local paper. And when I was 4 years old, we moved to South Jersey, to a suburb, bought a little house at the end of a cul-de-sac. It was an ugly gray 4-bedroom house on, call it a quarter of an acre. And we moved in the dead of winter. And unknown to us at the time, this new house came with a carbon monoxide gas leak. And we all started getting headaches. And on New Year's Day, 1980, my mom collapses unconscious on the floor of her bedroom. So she is the canary in the coal mine. And this leads to hospital visits, blood tests, and then the discovery of massive amounts of carbon monoxide in her bloodstream. This then leads to the discovery of the gas leak, which my dad, even after calling the gas company a couple times, who assured us that everything was fine, my dad actually found with an HVAC friend, and he unceremoniously ripped out this heat exchanger, threw it on the curb. But the damage was really done for my mom irreparably. So as he and I bounced back, because we were only getting evening exposure, and mom was getting 24/7 exposure, unpacking boxes, putting frames on the wall, working in the basement near the leak. What happened to her was her immune system irreparably shut down, and her body was no longer able to process anything chemical. So perfume would make her sick, soap would make her sick, car fumes, the ink from books would make her sick, which pained her as a writer. So I remember there were signs on the outside of our house: keep out, chemically sensitive patient. And unfortunately, I have over 40 years of intimate experience with masks, with 3M's whole suite of masks, from the N95 to the charcoal mask. So I never really saw my mom's face again after the accident. She was always covering her face with a mask. And, I just remember specific kind of oddities where she still wanted to read. So I would take her books and I would bake them in the oven, at 200 or 250. And over time, that smell of ink would wear off. And then I would walk upstairs. And at the time, she was living in a bathroom, a tile covered bathroom. And the room was then covered in aluminum foil to keep any sort of varnish, away from her. And she would open this door with kind of crinkle of aluminum foil, and she would be holding a cellophane bag with cotton gloves, and she would have her mask on. And she would take this slightly burned book from me, and she would put it inside the bag with her mask, and then she would shut the door. And that was how she was able to read. So just weird, a weird childhood. Only child, family planning stopped with this. Amazing dad who was kind of a 6'1", middle class president of a small cap electronics company, and he just never ran off with his secretary. He stayed by her faithfully and loyally. My parents had a deep and authentic Christian faith that they would credit wholeheartedly for their ability to manage this, what would be a lifetime of trials, really. And they brought me up in the church. They brought me up with a foundation of spirituality, of morality. And if he'd asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up at 13 or 15, I would have said, I'm going to be a doctor, and I'm going to cure my mom, and then I'm going to cure all the other sick people in her world, who had that similar condition. So that was really chapter one. Instead of becoming a doctor, at 18 years old, I became a nightclub promoter. So probably the opposite. Yeah, almost the same thing, right? I think I had that prodigal son moment, and it's so cliche and kind of banal to look back on. But I woke up and said, now it's my turn to have fun. I sacrificed my childhood. I've never had a drink. I've never smoked. I didn't have sex. I didn't use bad language. Now I want to do all of those things. And the place to do those things was New York City. And I realized there was actually a job. There was a profession where you could get paid money to do all those things. And it was called a nightclub promoter. So for the next 10 years, to the horror of my conservative Christian parents, I climbed up New York City's social ladder to become one of the top nightclub guys in all of New York City. And I worked at, well, it was an empty honor, really. But I worked at 40 clubs, just to give you a sense of the intensity of this experience. 40 clubs over 10 years. And we would describe it as a life of models and bottles. So we would sell $1,000 bottles of champagne to bankers and to rich guys because they wanted to hang around with fashion models and celebrities. And if we could orchestrate these two things in perfect unity and hire the best DJs and work at the best clubs with the one-way glass where we could see outside, but they couldn't see us choosing who came into the club past the velvet rope, then, this was the mystery. This was promoting clubs. And, maybe no surprise to anybody listening, I picked up all of the vices that came with the territory. It started with smoking and then drinking and then, some pot and then some cocaine and then some ecstasy and some MDMA and, just an experimentation with pretty much everything short of heroin. Then the pornography, then the strip clubs, then the gambling, and just a real debauched, hedonistic life of vice that looked really glamorous on the outside, because you would have seen me jumping into a stretch limo with 3 models, on the cover of fashion magazines, and jumping in somebody else's private plane to go to Buzios, Brazil for vacation, or Punta del Este, Uruguay, or Fashion Week in Milan or Paris. But on the inside, rotting. I mean, spiritually bankrupt, emotionally bankrupt, morally bankrupt, and never in love or never in a healthy relationship with any of these girls. So that was chapter 2, and that came to an end, or it began to come to an end one day when I woke up at 28 years old, and half my body went numb, just inexplicably. I just couldn't feel half my body. And I remember walking over my loft in Midtown Manhattan and turning on the hot water, and I watched the steam coming off of the water, and I ran my hand and my arm under this boiling water, and I couldn't feel anything. And I was convinced something was terribly wrong with me. Perhaps it was a brain tumor, some incurable disease. And that was such a clarion, cathartic wake-up call. And I was convinced I was going to die. And it very quickly led me to assess my 28 years on planet Earth and what had they meant. If I did have a brain tumor, if I was given weeks or a month to live, what would my life have meant? And the only thing I could come up with that somebody would be able to write on my tombstone was, "Here lies a man who's gotten 1 million people drunk." Here lies a man who partied well and got 1 million plus people wasted. And I think I realized in that moment of potential mortality how far I had come. I really found myself in the proverbial pig pen, covered in pig feces, and missing home, missing what I'd been brought up to believe and what I'd been brought up to value. It took me about 4 months to find my way out of nightlife. And, I asked a pretty simple question, which is, what would the opposite of my life look like? I know in business, there's a lot of talk of pivots. I think I realized that a pivot was not in order. Okay, this was a radical 180-degree change that was in order. How do I think the opposite, act the opposite, do the opposite? And the opposite of my life looked like trying to find my way back to faith and trying to find my way back to God, and then giving 1 year of the 10 years that I'd selfishly wasted in service to, maybe in quotes at the time, the poor, people who were suffering, people who were less fortunate around the world. So that was my big idea. And I said, all right, I'm a radical guy. I'm going to sell everything I own. I'm out of nightclubs, and I'm going to go become a humanitarian volunteer. And then I applied to the 10 famous organizations that I'd tangentially heard of, from the Doctors Without Borders to Red Crosses and Salvation Armies and World Visions. And maybe no surprise, nobody would take me. And so I hit a dead end there as I was rejected by about 10 organizations. And very fortunately for me, and I'll kind of, end chapter 2 here, one organization who was not on the first list of 10 said, if I was willing to pay them $500 a month for the pleasure of volunteering, and if I was willing to go live in the poorest country in the world, post-war Liberia, West Africa, then I could join their mission. And I said, oh my gosh, this is opposite. What's more opposite than paying to volunteer and then actually going to the most extreme country on planet Earth? I feel like I should let you talk now. That was like a monologue that you didn't ask for.
No, this is it's riveting. Wow. So what happened once you arrived in Liberia? Because you must have had some what's the expression? Come to Jesus moments.
Yeah. Well, the job that I had applied for, and maybe some people listening can resonate with this, was not a job I was really qualified to do. I had applied for a position of volunteer photojournalist. Now, technically, I was not a photojournalist. I had gotten a degree from NYU, kind of part time C minus student. Was very surprised when they actually mailed the diploma because I didn't think I went to enough classes to graduate. But I was a pretty good writer and I was a pretty good photographer just as a hobby. And the mission that took me was a medical mission. So I want everybody to imagine now, take a cruise liner, maybe not as big as the new Virgins or Carnival cruise liners, but an old cruise liner and a ship 522 feet that was converted to a hospital, to a floating hospital. And this organization called Mercy Ships would sail this hospital ship up and down the coast of Africa with a very simple idea. Let's bring the best doctors and the best surgeons from all over the world. Let's encourage them to give their vacation time to us. And let's bring the highest quality medical services to people who couldn't afford them, who wouldn't have access to them in the country. So this was going to be the mission, and my job. Again, I kind of wink at job because I was paying $500 a month for the pleasure of doing this job, was to document all of the life-saving work that happened on this hospital ship. So yeah, the come to Jesus moment, my third day in West Africa, I remember waking up at 5 a.m, putting on blue hospital scrubs, grabbing my two Nikon D1X digital cameras. Digital cameras were new back then. And yeah, they have those big chunky memory cards. And I had learned that the government, the African government, had given us a soccer stadium in the center of the capital city to triage the sick people who would come and meet our doctors. And I knew that over the course of the mission, I think it was about 8 months where we'd be in country, we had 1,500 available surgery slots to fill. And I remember, Stephan, thinking to myself, like, are there 1,500 people who are going to come with facial tumors and flesh-eating disease and cleft lips and cleft palates and in need of facial reconstruction? I mean, we were actually kind of niche in the things that our surgeons specialized in. And I'll never forget snaking through the dusty city, in this convoy of Land Rovers with doctors and nurses and surgeons. And as we approached the stadium, there were 5,000 sick people standing in the parking lot who had gotten there in the middle of the night to wait for us to open the doors of the stadium and begin triaging their needs. And on the end of day 2, about 48 hours later, we had handed out all 1,500 surgery cards, and we had to say no to more than 3,000 people. We had to send them home without the ability to see a doctor, without the ability to get well. And I later learned many of these people had walked for more than a month to that stadium. They had walked from neighboring countries. They had heard there were doctors coming who might be able to save the life of their child, and embarked on a 30-day journey only to be turned away because we didn't have enough doctors. We didn't have enough surgery slots. So that was the come to Jesus moment, seeing a need in person, in proximity, the most visceral people suffering in front of me, and then knowing we couldn't meet the need. We couldn't meet the entire need. One doctor said to me that day, so just now imagine my job was to hang a white sheet in this stadium, set up a camera on a tripod, and then take 1,500 pictures of the sick, deformed patients, potential patients, before their surgery for the medical library. So I got to meet every one of them, inches apart, setting them up, making sure that the sheet was entirely behind them. And I just remember weeping that day. I'd never experienced anything like this. I mean, I was a couple of weeks before, I was in a DJ booth spraying champagne, over 1,000 people underneath, who were dancing and kind of, cavorting to music, to house music. So I remember one of the doctors came over and he saw me just kind of breaking down, and he said, focus on the hope, focus on the hope, focus on the 1,500 people who we are going to be able to help, the 1,500 lives who we are going to be able to change, because we all came. And I think that moment was 19 years ago, but that focus on the hope has really been an animating idea in my life. Well, I did a year with them, and I took 50,000 photos, and I saw people with leprosy get helped. I saw people with tumors get removed. I remember seeing a 25-year-old blind woman with children, and she had cataracts. She had these big white cataracts, and I don't exactly know why she had them. I think exposure to the equatorial sun, no UV Ray-Bans, but she had seen, and then she had gone blind, but she'd never seen her children. And I remember meeting her. Her name was Marguerite. And then I remember scrubbing up and watching her eye surgery. And I think it took 11 minutes. I mean, I don't know if anybody's ever seen a cataract surgery, but you kind of take from what I remember, you take a scalpel, you slit the side of the eye, you grab some tweezers, you pull out the nasty cataract, you slip in a new lens, and then you sew them up or you cauterize it. I mean, it was an unbelievably inexpensive and quick surgery. And then you bandage up the patient. And I remember just thinking, as a photographer, as a storyteller, I want to be there when they remove the patches. So she came back 2 days later, and she was in this small hospital waiting room, and the nurse, her sister's there, and the nurse begins to remove the patches. And this woman begins to scream and dance and clap and shout, and she tackles me, and tries to dance with me, and she sees her sister, and she tackles her sister. And I just remember thinking, I mean, is it that easy? Is it a couple $100 that was needed? Was it a simple surgery? I mean, it felt like you or I could have done this with a little bit of training. Obviously in the right environment, a sterile environment, and this was a proper medical operating theater on a hospital ship. But I got to see a version of that up close and personal 1,500 times. And it left such an impression on me that the work was important, but the need was greater than we could meet. So at the end of the first year, I had all these photographs, and I didn't know what was next. So I just came back to New York City, and I got a gallery in Chelsea donated, and I printed 108 of the photographs I've taken and tried to tell the stories of these patients. And then I invited everybody I knew from Nightlife to come to the gallery and see what my experience had been. And through walking through that gallery show, and then through a little event we did at the end, we raised $96,000 for more surgeries. So little clues, maybe what I had learned for 10 years promoting nightclubs, I could take the promotion part of the learning, and I could promote something completely different, something that was redemptive, something that was compassionate, something that actually mattered to people. And I could turn that promotion, into not a night where we rang $50,000 at the bar, but a gallery where we rang $100,000 for surgery. And that happened. And then I remember thinking, I got to go follow the money. Let me go back for another year. I also didn't know what was next. So I didn't want to go back into nightclubs, but I just didn't know what to do next, except follow the money. And over the next year, I tried to connect the people who had given the $100,000, many of them $20 and $50 and $100 at a time, to the continued work back in Liberia, the next 1,500 people who we were able to help. And it was during that second tour. So I was 29 years old at the time. And I remember just thinking, I got to get off this ship. I got to get out of this city and into the rural areas. I need to see how people are living. What's causing this sickness that we're seeing? And I saw people drinking dirty water for the first time. And I remember this 13-year-old child, her name was Hawa, and she was drinking from a green, viscous swamp. There were bugs, there were insects on the top of the water. And she would walk from her house and she would fill up a bucket and she would drink the water. And when you watch a child poison themselves in real life, it makes an impression. Water for me was something that I'd always had. I was born into a middle-class environment. Mom was sick, but we always had water. She always had water. I used to sell Voss water for $10 a bottle in the nightclubs, and people wouldn't even open the water. They would just order 10 or 15 bottles and let it sit there as they drank booze. So I learned in that second year two really important things about the context and the environment I was living in. I learned half of the country didn't have clean water to drink. So half of the people living in the country were drinking diseased, contaminated water. And then I learned half the disease in the country could be tracked back to that same dirty water and a lack of sanitation and hygiene. So it was almost as if I had discovered the root cause of so much of the sickness propelling 5,000 people to stand outside a parking lot at 5 a.m. hoping to see a doctor. And if they just had clean water, if they just had the most basic need for health met, we could have at least cut that number in half. And that led me to water. And I remember at the end of the second tour in Africa, I kind of was sharing my observations and my pictures of what I was seeing in the communities with the chief medical officer. He'd been there 26 years, and he says, why don't you go bring everybody water? And why don't you go back to New York and make it your life's mission to bring everybody clean water? And there was something so simple about that. Okay, okay, I'm 30. I got a bunch of years to throw at this. That sounds like a noble cause. And at the time, there were over 1 billion people, over 1 billion souls on planet Earth who were drinking disgusting, toxic water every single day. And I kind of raised my hand and said, I'm this 30-year-old guy. I'm going to come back to New York and I'm going to try to bring clean water to the world. And that kind of starts chapter 3.
Wow. So how did you get this nonprofit off the ground? You had connections from all those years promoting and living the high life. Did you, I don't know, just start a 501c3 on your own? Did you partner with somebody's existing 501c3? Did you become like the chief fundraising officer, or did you? This seems like an insurmountable task to just start a world-changing nonprofit.
Well, maybe this is encouraging to somebody listening, but I came back and found that I was actually $35,000 in debt because my nightclub promoter partner had never dissolved our company, nor had he paid taxes. And I didn't have any money because I had I'd sold everything and I'd given everything I had to mercy ships and the people I'd met along the way. So, the moment in time, I have an idea or a vision or, what felt like even a divine calling, bring clean water to the world, but nowhere to live and no money. So I wound up living on a closet floor for about, I think, 4 or 5 months to start for free rent in Soho, New York City. And I just looked around and said, is there anywhere else I feel like I could be that chief fundraiser for, or that chief storyteller? And nobody was doing it like I envisioned it. As I looked around, the water sector was anemic. Very few charities at any size or scale. The marketing and the branding, seemed subpar. And I had some ideas of how we might do it differently. And I think, like many entrepreneurs, your inexperience becomes an asset in the early days because you're just trying to create the perfect thing with you and your friends as the customer, the thing that doesn't exist. And I remember looking at the charitable sector and saying, where's the Apple of charities? Where's the Nike? Where's the Virgin? Where's the Disney? Where are the epic, imaginative, inspiring storytelling brands that should be rising to meet the greatest needs of the world? And I didn't see anything out there. So I said, well, I think in order to achieve a mission as huge, as seemingly insurmountable as bringing 1 billion people clean water on planet Earth, I'm going to need a vision to reinvent or reimagine a different kind of charity, the perfect kind of charity. And I just started talking to people and said, why don't you give to charities? And I realized there was a huge amount of distrust. There was a huge amount of disbelief that their donations, that their money would actually matter, that their money would actually reach the people in need. And I just had a couple ideas sitting around a couch. I would wake up, sleeping on my walk-in closet floor, and there were a couple of volunteers around at the table, and I'd say, what would the perfect charity look like? And the first big idea was it would be a charity where we could promise the public that 100% of whatever they gave, whether it was $1 or $1 million, would go directly to get people clean water. It would go directly to the construction of water projects. And then I realized, okay, well, someone's going to have to pay for the overhead. There is overhead. There will be staff salaries. There's going to be an office someday. So I opened up 2 separately audited bank accounts and said, I'm going to raise my hand and go find a completely different group of visionary entrepreneurs or business leaders to pay for all that nasty overhead, that unsexy overhead, so that millions of people one day will be able to give in the purest way possible, where 100% of their money goes. And I remember thinking, well, to have absolute integrity with 100%, I'm also going to need to pay back credit card fees. So if somebody went online and they pulled out their Amex and they gave $100, sadly, we would get $97. So we would have to pay back that $3 that Amex took as a transaction fee and send all $100 of the intended gift to build a water project to get people clean water. So that was kind of the first pillar, was this extreme 100% model. I didn't know then, but that was a competitive advantage against 99.999% charities in America, because it's just so difficult. If I'd known how hard it was, I might have done something different. But then the second kind of big, aha moment or pillar was realizing that because money wasn't fungible in this charity model, we could build technology, we could build tools to track 100% of these donations to Africa, to India, to Southeast Asia later, and down into the communities, and show people the projects that their $9.14 of lemonade money that their kid collected, exactly where that $9.14 went. And they could see a satellite image of the well or the gravity fed system or the rainwater harvesting system, whatever the intervention was. They could see the infrastructure built with their donations. So proof became this really powerful second pillar. And then the third thing really was, I mentioned earlier, I just wanted to build an epic, imaginative, inspiring, creative brand that was anchored in hope and opportunity, and not shame and guilt. And I thought we just needed good taste, and we needed to hire great designers. And then maybe the most important thing of the business model is what we wouldn't do, which is we wouldn't send a guy like me from New York City to Uganda with a hard hat on to try to drill a well. We would hire locals in each of these countries, local hydrogeologists, local technicians, local well drillers, and we would grow their capacity. We would help them scale their local organizations. And if we were successful, we would create thousands of jobs in each of these countries. And it would be culturally appropriate, and it would be sustainable in the long run. So I kind of just put all these things together. Okay, let's give away 100% of people's money. Let's show them where the money goes. Let's build an awesome brand. And then let's work through locals in each of these countries. And the best idea I had, and this is now exactly 17 years ago, was to throw myself a 31st birthday party in a nightclub. And I got the club donated, and I got open bar donated, and I invited every single person on my email list, and 700 people came that night. But to get inside the club, they had to donate $20 and put it in this big plexi box. And at the end of the night, we had $15,000, and we took 100% of that money, and we built our very first well in northern Uganda in Africa. And then we sent people out, and we took photos of the well, and we took video of the clean water flowing. We interviewed the people who were benefiting, and then we sent all that information back to the 700 people. And we said, you came to a party, you gave $20, and here is exactly where your money went. And here are the people's lives who you have changed. And, from that very simple first fundraiser, we said, let's just build that idea of connection, of community, of kind of the proof loop into the DNA, into the core infrastructure of how this organization will operate. And maybe we'll scale. And, we're now coming up on $1 billion raised from that seed, from that first night where people gave $20.
Wow. Amazing. Congratulations on all this. You've done amazing things, amazing work. How do you see this becoming a permanent fix and not just a Band-Aid solution? Like somebody is currently without clean water, and you provide some sort of way for them to get cleaner water, whether it's a well or a filter drinking straw or something like that. How do you ensure that this doesn't go back to the way that it was?
Yeah. Oh, great question. So the sustainability is such a key focus for the organization. If you kind of fast forward now, so, Charity Water is helping about 2 million new people every year. We've got a donor community of millions now across 149 countries. We've got about 2,500 locals across these countries who are showing up every day, about 120 people here in the States and in Europe working at Charity Water. So that's kind of the moment in time. We have now invested millions and millions and millions of dollars in sustainability and sensor technology, where what we do now is we will build many of these projects and we will put on a remote sensor. So think of this almost a little like Nest, if people are familiar with that, where you could have a second home, and on your smartphone, you could see the temperature of that second home. You could set the temperature down in the winter to 57 degrees. You don't want your pipes to freeze, but you don't want to be heating a home that no one's at. Well, we got a $5 million grant from Google, an innovation grant to develop sensor technology for our projects. And we now have the largest data set in the history of the world when it comes to rural water supply. And we're managing the downtime of projects. And when a well fails that has a sensor on it, we're able to dispatch a technician who can make a service call. So think of this almost like Best Buy's Geek Squad in Africa, or Apple Care. Imagine if you were living in a Malawi village and you dropped your iPhone, if you had one, and it cracked. And then 2 days later, a mechanic from Apple turns up and says, "Our data shows your screen is cracked. We're here to fix it. And we'd like you to pay for that repair." So there's a huge push and a lot of advances made in sustainability. I will say, water is very simple as you think about it in theory. I'm sure we have a lot of analytical people listening. I mean, it's just such a universal common good. If you don't have water, your health suffers. If you don't have water at your kid's school, the education suffers. If the women in your village are walking 8 hours a day, 7 days a week for water, the economy of your village suffers. If you don't have, if you just think as a human being, if I didn't have clean water, how radically different my life would be. There's a lot of, disaster porn movies, right, about like losing the internet or losing connectivity. Well, imagine losing water. Imagine not being able to brush your teeth or brushing your teeth with from a swamp. Imagine having diarrhea 5 days a week. Imagine losing your child to dysentery. I have 3 kids. My kids get sick. I head out to the Duane Reade and I buy Pedialyte, right? Because how do you cure diarrhea? You cure it with hydration. But imagine watching your child dehydrate from the same toxic water that made them sick in the first place, and that's all you have to heal them, and then they die in your arms. I remember when I started Charity Water, 4,500 kids every day were simply dying of bad water, completely preventable deaths. So water is a really easy kind of maybe development thing to get behind, because you have radically and inarguably transformed a human life for the better. Not a little better, not a lot better, transformatively better when you are taking it from dirty water to clean water. So I think you asked the right question, which is what we've spent, millions and millions of dollars and tens of thousands of hours on as an organization, which is how do we keep that clean water flowing over time? And there's a lot of ways to do it, but probably most exciting is this sensor technology.
Amazing. Yeah, I was thinking, like, as part of your proof loop, wouldn't it be cool to have a webcam showing the people coming to the well and getting their water, seeing it functioning and so forth? And hey, that's your well. you you paid for that.
Yeah, I mean, we've thought about it. I think that could get a little voyeuristic. Some hedge fund manager, with a sitting there watching the Africans that are drinking money. Most of our givers are giving even anonymously. They don't want their name on any wells. They're giving to. So I think maybe less the camera of people coming, but the data is very interesting. Being able to say to you, hey, you wrote a $30,000 check. You built 3 wells. Here's how much water. Here's how many liters are flowing from that $30,000 gift. And just to put this in perspective, I was playing around with Dali the other day, and let's call it a $12,000 gift. A well in a community, and Charity Water funds 10 or 11 different technologies now. So a well is just one of the 11. But a well that costs $12,000 will pump 1 million liters every year. Now imagine going to your local deli and buying the cheapest water, right? Like Adirondack water. 1 liter of that is going to cost you at least $1. So imagine, a $12,000 investment as we price water, delivering $1 million of clean water every year for 10 years. It's really that compelling, Stephan. A $12,000 investment producing, what we would bottle and pay $10 million for. And it's clean water coming out of the ground, trapped in aquifers, 200 feet, 250 feet underground.
Wow. That's compelling. I've donated written those kinds of checks for Impact Network. I've been on their board for a decade and given a lot of money to them to build schools in rural Zambia. It's surprisingly inexpensive to build a school and operate it. Maybe 20 grand, 25 grand to service kids who would have had to walk for hours to get to school otherwise and probably wouldn't have.
Yep. It's true. It's important work. I think if there were a second thing that I would be passionate about, it would probably be education. I think, people need water first to be healthy. They need water at their schools. And that's one of the big things we do is we bring clean water and sanitation and toilets to students. But education is so important. So thanks for your work on that.
So I have some questions about your story. So you mentioned having an experience of your body going numb on on one side. What was it? Did you discover the cause of it? Do you have any sense?
Yeah, I never came back to that. The tests were all negative and inconclusive. They couldn't find anything wrong with me. So, existentially numb, spiritually numb. Yeah, my lifestyle was destructive. I would go to dinner at 10 o'clock, the club at 12, drink and do coke, go to after hours at 5 in the morning. And then at noon, take Ambien to come down. So this is definitely not a healthy lifestyle. But nobody ever diagnosed it conclusively.
Do you still have any negative effects of all the drugs and the alcohol?
I think what was really helpful for me was having this moment, having such a clear moment, which was walking up the long gangway of a 500-foot hospital ship and sailing away to a new life. And I wanted the new life. It was prophetic. It was symbolic. I wanted to leave everything about my old life behind on land and go somewhere else. So I specifically remember the night before I surrendered my passport and joined the mission. I got fantastically drunk and I smoked 3 packs of cigarettes because I knew that would be it. And I drink a little bit today. I like craft beer, and I moved to Nashville recently. So, give me some nice bourbon and I'm okay. But I never smoked again. And I vowed never to look at another pornographic image again. And I vowed never to gamble again and never to touch drugs again. There was something that just felt like this was the moment to say no to all of it at once. And then my environment changed so dramatically. I don't think, Stephan, I could have done it and just said, while becoming a nightclub promoter, I'm going to quit smoking and I'm going to quit sleeping around and I'm going to quit, snorting coke, because that's what everybody was doing around me. I will say, when you join a hospital ship full of Christian doctors, none of those things are cool. Doctors are not smoking cigarettes. Doctors are not doing lines of cocaine in the bathroom. So the culture was so different that it really allowed me to embrace this new clean living in a community where that was celebrated. In a club, I would just be the downer. Oh, come on. What? You're not joining us? You're not joining us? So that really helped. I don't know that I would have been that strong to quit any of those things with any longevity had the environment not dramatically changed.
Amazing. Well, one thing I notice about these end of year giving campaigns is that a number of them have matching gifts or a matching fund. And it seems to me like if you had this year round where there was a matching fund where people would be motivated to donate specifically to overhead because their donation would be doubled, that could be a really cool idea. You've ever thought of it?
I like it. I like it. If anybody's listening and wants to be a part of it, reach out. Yeah. I will say, people that are listening, couple ways they could get involved, because we are kind of end of year. We have a community called The Spring. And there's a video. So if you heard me talk and like, oh, what does this actually look like? There's a short film we've made that's had over 100 million views. You can go to thespring.com or Charity Water and just Google The Spring. And you can see that video. You can share it. You can kind of see some of these images. But think of that as a monthly community of givers, just like Spotify or Netflix or Hulu or Disney Plus or the New York Times subscription, except you don't get music or movies or TV or news. 100% of what people give every month goes directly to help people get clean water. And it only costs us $40 to get one person clean water. So there's probably a bunch of people listening who, without any, pain to their bank account or income, could give one person clean water every single month. And that community now is the largest driver of growth for our impact. It's not the billionaire givers. It's not the huge givers. It's this kind of groundswell of people that say, I could do 10 a month on my pension. I could do 20 a month. I could do 40 a month. I could do 100 a month. And then kind of the next thing is we do have, there's some people that like you, I think, who have just sponsored an entire community and said, I could write a check for 12 grand or send some stock and one community can get access to clean water. So we, if you're moved, you're more than welcome to join the mission. I've been kind of asking on behalf of others now for 17 years, and water really does change everything. I mean, it is. My wife and I have been able to be blessed and to give lots to the organization over the years, and we have several wells. And we took our young kids to Africa for the first time this year, and they got to see kind of the impact of our family's giving. And it's a real blessing to be able to provide life's most basic need for people.
Yeah.
And the overhead today, there's 131 families. So if people are curious how that $1 million gift turned into a sustainable business model, it's the founders of Spotify and Pinterest and Shopify and Twitter and LinkedIn. So many entrepreneurs and business leaders have raised their hands and said, we will pay for the overhead. So 131 entrepreneurs and families today pay for the overhead so that millions of people around the world are able to give in the purest way, where 100% of their money goes.
Fabulous. All right. Well, Scott, this was such an inspirational story of rising from this scorched earth. It just seemed like you were headed to disaster, to ruin, but you turned your life around and you made such a difference in the world and revealed so much light, and you're continuing to do that every day. So thank you so much for the gift of who you are in the world, and thanks for sharing your story.
Well, thanks for having me on and letting me share.
And thank you, listener. I hope you'll do something with this more than just open up your wallet. I hope you at least open up your wallet. Doesn't have to be to Charity Water, but giving is an important aspect of being on this earth. And find an opportunity where you can do something unbelievable, like what Scott did. We'll catch you in the next episode. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, signing off.